Are we still configured for internet?
So we're doing it on this laptop.
Yeah, but are we still configured for the internet?
So this computer doesn't have the space, so it cannot operate on this one.
No, I know. I'm trying to take my stuff from my.
So you want to do it in virtual
I
trial?
want to go back to Gmail. Put my slides off of that. This is just too many. This is like completely for somebody who's dyslexic. This is really a problem. Thank you for being patient. But we think that the Zoom thing is not. So everything's I don't have to put my slide under there. Yeah. Okay. So then I need to download this. Is there a where does it go on the PC? Mine is called, mine thing is called John's Sheet. That's not mine. Yeah, that was mine, sorry. Okay. Okay, so that. Thank you folks for being patient. It's so nice to see all of you here. And then to the faculty, there are a couple of faculty that were very helpful in getting people to come in for the lecture. If you teach a section of studio, whenever we have lectures, so that my successor doesn't have to feel a sense of embarrassment to the lecturer, could the faculty members make sure that their students come get seated before they take the seat themselves? It's just common courtesy. Luckily, I won't have to corral people very much longer. And yeah, just go ahead. Perfect. Thank you, Kenny. You know, we are very much blessed because we have IT support staff here in-house that I've seen Kenny and Fabian really bend over backwards a lot to make sure that things work really well here. And so let's give Kenny a round of applause for getting us here online. For those of you that don't remember me, I'm Brian Kelly. And welcome to the final lecture of the spring semester. As I said, I'm Brian Kelly. I'm the director of the architecture program for the next 11 weeks. And excited about seeing those 11 weeks fly by very quickly. Life has a funny way of orchestrating things. Actually, before I get into that, I know there are a couple housekeeping things. First of all, the presentation is being recorded. For those of you in the room, that doesn't mean anything. For those of you that are watching us online on the live link, if you don't want to be seen or heard, make sure that you mute your microphone and turn off your camera. Or you could watch us on Facebook Live or YouTube Live. Follow that link, go to the current events site, and you'll see everything you need to know about how to join us. We like to begin our public gatherings with an acknowledgement. And we'd like to begin that acknowledgement by affirming that the University of Maryland is built on land that was stolen from the Piscataway people by European colonists. Subsequently, the land upon which the campus is located is likely to have been worked by some of the over 300 enslaved African people who were the property of Charles Benedict Culver, founder of the Maryland Agricultural College, the predecessor to the present-day University of Maryland. So they ask that we pay our respects to the Piscataway people and to the enslaved African-American people whose lives were tied to these lands. Please take a moment to consider the many legacies of violence, displacement, migration, and settlement that bring us together here today and to give us the privilege of being together this evening. So as I was starting to say, life has a funny way of orchestrating things. Sometimes the people that you meet at the beginning of your career become very important at the end of your career. I'm just telling you this because for most of you out there, you're at the beginning of your careers. You might want to think about that. Tonight's lecturer, Adam Bresnick, is just one of those people. I met Adam in 1980. By the way, I offered Adam the opportunity to write this introduction, but he was too busy. So he didn't write the introduction. I decided to write it. And so woe to you for that. But I also warn people, be careful what images you share with me. So earlier this morning, Adam shared this image, and it reminded me that I first met Adam in 1987 when I was a young assistant professor here at the University of Maryland. And Adam was a senior in the BS program. And here's evidence of that. I'm standing there adjusting my tie, doing my Rodney Dangerfield imitation. And there's Adam right behind me. And Adam was about to graduate. Adam was a serious and talented, and should I suggest, precocious student of architecture, who at the time was bound for graduate study in Princeton. When he left Maryland for graduate school, I followed his progress from afar through my network of covert informants. I knew that Adam had excelled at Princeton, graduated, and then left for a grand tour of Europe, which I understood terminated in Madrid, where he refused to leave, joining that class of American expatriates who prefer romance of abroad in favor to the harsh realities of at home. In the spring of 2018, thanks to the magic of social media, Adam and I reconnected, and he suggested that I should visit Madrid. Now, had he hacked my email? I mean, how did he know that in June of 2018, I was precisely headed to Madrid? We'll never know, because Adam is a very discreet person. He probably will never share how he found that information out. At any rate, we met up in Madrid, first in his office, and then later in his spectacular rooftop apartment, complete with giardino pensile. I have no idea how you would say that in Spanish, but in Italian, it's giardino pensile. There it is. I know, as I got to know Adam more, I realized that he was the ideal candidate for key distinguished professor in architecture. He was an accomplished practitioner, an educator, and well-versed in adaptive reuse of existing buildings. And most importantly, for me at least, an avid collector of architectural curiosities. His home is a contemporary version of numbers 12, 13, 14 Lincoln's Inn Fields in London, containing some possessions that even Sir John Soane himself would be envious of. If you don't know that reference, I suggest you learn it. We originally planned to have Adam here in the spring of 2021, but COVID had different ideas. We all remained optimistic, and we were able to bring him here this past January, where he is team teaching a topical design studio with Professor Lamprakos. And just to tick off the highlights of his resume, Mr. Bresnick is a registered architect practicing in Madrid, Spain. He received his initial architectural education at the University of Maryland, where he had his Bachelor of Science in Architecture conferred in 1988. He completed his Master's of Architecture from Princeton. Whoops, I'm backing up, I don't know why. From this one's one of these magical machines. It's in European, not American. So everything's on the other side of the road. There we go. Completed his Master of Architecture in Princeton in 1990. Eventually, he achieved his architectural registration in Spain, which for an American is pretty formidable. And his PhD in architecture, impressively, his PhD in architecture at the Escuela Superior de Arquitectura de Madrid. That's about as close as I can get to doing Spanish. My Italian basically destroys my possibility of speaking in Spanish. In 2008, so they're quite amazing. Mr. Bresnick is currently a practicing architect in Madrid, Spain. He oversees projects in Spain and throughout Europe. His work has been critically recognized as is evidenced by the numerous awards cited in his curriculum vitae. His work has been published in books, academic and professional journals. Mr. Bresnick has significant experience in higher education, having worked in both Spanish and American university contexts. Earlier in 2021, he was appointed Key Distinguished Professor by the President and Provost of the university. That's one of the interesting things about the key position, is it requires the President and the Provost also to sign off on this appointment. The Key Professorship is possible due to a tremendous generosity of the Key family. Paul H. Key was one of the two originally licensed architects in the state of Maryland, and he and his wife Grace established the Key Distinguished Professorship in architecture in 1967, well in advance of the beginning of the School of Architecture. The Key Distinguished Professorship has played an important part in the life in the School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation by recognizing eminent practitioners and scholars. And so tonight, join me in welcoming Adam Bresnick back home to the School of Architecture, Planning and Preservation.
Okay, can you hear me? Okay. Well, thank you, first of all, Brian, for that amazing introduction. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's a Friday. I'll try to be brief. I have too much to talk about and too much to tell, but I'll go as fast as possible. We've had some technical difficulties, so thank you for bearing with. I wanted to, first of all, thank the Provost and the President, also our Dean, Dawn Jordan, and especially Brian for his invitation to come as the Key Professor, which is really emotional for me because I was once sitting where you guys are now, and hopefully 20 years hence, 1 or 2 or 3, or all of you will be up here as well. I also wanted to thank Michelle Lamprakos, who's made the semester really a great opportunity and fun synergies between the two of us, and also my students in 601, who I see some of you guys, or all of you guys here. Thank you so much for coming and for your patience with my problems with this language that I used to speak fluently. I'll try to go fast. I have over 100 slides. To start the lecture today, I wanted to title Small, Medium, Large, Extra Large, and talk about design in detail and scale issues in all different size projects. And first, just a little bit of a little background of who and where I've come from. So I grew up in this area, and I grew up in Bowie, Maryland, in PG County. and was fortunate to study here at the University of Maryland. Actually, you can see Ralph Bennett there giving me my diploma here at this very location. Some colleagues there, and then I went to Princeton to do my master's immediately afterwards, after which I embarked on a grand tour, which took about 4 months. I just have one picture there of a friend and I in Turkey, traveled all around Europe, and then ended up in Spain. I had a high school level, so thank you, public school education in the US. I had a idea of Spanish language, so I was able to ask questions and not understand the answers. And I somehow arrived in the office of Ignacio Vicens and Jose Antonio Ramos, and you can see just an image there to the right of them, my colleagues at the office. A really fabulous office where I'm just showing one project. This is the house that we did, which is the first project that I ever saw from a first sketch to publication, prize-winning project. And so to me, it was fascinating to have gone through the whole educational process and see that really it does happen, and I made the model of that house, which looked fairly similar to what we see on the screen. That model traveled to Miami to see the client, and there's this wonderful here and there and back again, which I also said, from there and back again, like the Hobbit, like what we learn on this journey. Somewhere amid all of this, I became the English tutor to Alberto Campo Baeza, who's a very well-known Spanish minimalist, although he'd kill me if I called him that. And I was fortunate to work with him on a house for Tom Ford, and we actually can see a little model there with Tom cut out. And this house, this is the guest pavilion for Tom Ford. Alberto also teaches as an educator as well, and I attended some juries with him. This is a jury that we had, I think, in 1997 at the University of Pennsylvania. Really summarizing a lot. Finally, I started my own office. Initially with a partner and then on my own. We were fortunate to have 8 years of projects in Moscow. So there I am on a rooftop in Moscow. We've won several prizes. I published my thesis, which is the cover of that book that you see there, The House of the Diva. I did my PhD at the Polytechnic, the University of Madrid. We won a Europa Nostra award for a historic adaptive reuse project, and there's the Queen of Spain giving me a prize. So that would be like a really fast, yeah, bye. So now I'll show you guys some work, and but I want you guys to really understand in all of this that I really feel like, I just, blinked and suddenly I'm up here. And that's not true, because there is a lot of blood, sweat, and tears between there and here, but you're the same. I really feel like, I remember sitting over there somewhere doing my, history of architecture exam and, scribbling and trying to get through the education. So there is light at the end of the tunnel, and there's lots of light, and there's lots of different lights, and there are different moments. So let's get into some work, which we all like to see pictures of things. So we're going to start with a small project, which is, these are not in order of dates. They're in order of small, medium, large, extra large. So we're going to start with a very tiny project, which is an interior job for a Catholic university. There's actually a dining room on the right with some sliding doors, and there's a museum space, and they wanted to insert in this space a little chapel so that the students could, sneak off between classes and pray for a better grade. So we conceived of this space as a sort of a room divider or a piece of furniture, a sort of interwoven lattice work between what was the museum space to the left, the dining room behind those sliding doors on the right, and this sort of folded screen. So we really thought of how it would be built, and we thought at a detailed level. And here you can get an idea of what it looks like in this space, and it's actually amazingly simple. It's just wooden slats, round wooden members that are then woven with fiberglass fabric, incorporating LED lighting. You can actually see the LED strips and these sectional details. One thing that I really am very proud of is the design of the tabernacle, which is where the communion wafer is stored. And one thing that is very interesting, and I'm going to go very fast, is that there's always a candle in these spaces. And we use this Inge Malwer designed electric candle, which is an LED screen. I don't know if you've ever seen it, but it makes my hair go on goosebumps, because it's really spiritual, and yet it's high tech. And so I was really pleased that we were able to convince the priest that we could install this in the chapel. Going to go fast. The next project is for the same university. We were able to get several commissions from them. This was for what I call a medium project, also an interior job in the center of Madrid, and it's a polyclinic. So it's the university students, the dental students can attend to real life customers. So it's in a working class neighborhood, a marginal neighborhood. And the idea is that for 20 euros, you can get, a cavity fixed or root canal or even orthodonture. At some point along the line, they decide to add physical therapy. So that's why a polyclinic. So this part over here is physical therapy, nutrition. This giant area is the dental clinic. Then there's laboratory spaces, and there's actually classrooms as well upstairs. But what I wanted to explain was this: it's a very interesting because it's a teaching school, so it's a teaching clinic, and so each nodule or module of 3 or 4 pods there's one professor for those 3 or 4 pods. So you're drilling a cavity, and your professor's like, "Don't do it like that," or "That's good, you're doing well." So they really have to keep an eye on things. So one of the design issues was how to group these elements or these spaces around a sort of logical floor plan so that they could be controlled by the maximum or minimum amount of professors, with also maintaining privacy. So each chair is oriented away from the door, so you can never see into somebody's mouth when you're walking by, because you're heading nearby and you don't want to see blood squirting or whatever. So it's very carefully articulated in this almost grape-like way. Somewhere along the line, somebody at the administration of the university decided what was to be a $3 million project should cost $1.5 million. So we had to, I believe it's called quality engineer. And we successfully lowered all the qualities without changing the design. So it's really a very interesting low-cost project with really interesting lighting. We made these baffles out of acoustical tile. We used a roofing material to make these curved pieces, and then also used color coding and signage to orient people amongst these different spaces. These are the spaces for the physical therapy with its signage and with the same organization of space. There's also, this is actually a fire door. This is actually kind of interesting. I had a GIF, but I don't think I loaded it. So this was too far from the egress. And so the fire department required us to install a door there. So we actually designed a door that disappears and opens and closes at that point. Once again, signage to get people in and out of these spaces. Here you can actually see how the chair is facing away from the opening. So although the professor can be looking in, the patient never sees anybody. And actually there's skylights in the roof as well. And the patient can see skylights, can see natural lighting. So there was an idea of how to work with the patient so they would feel in a good space. One other thing is the patients are all in the waiting room, and each student goes and picks up the patient and brings them to their space. So it's not like you're wandering through this space trying to find the space. There was a really good TikTok that one of the students had done of the space, which I should have done. And upstairs, just to briefly show, there are these classrooms as well. And that did win a prize for material usage by the College of Architects, which is the professional organization in Spain. Going pretty fast. Am I speaking too rapidly? Okay. Okay, so the next space, going up in scale, even though that space is physically larger than what I'm going to speak about now, this project is much more complex. My students have already seen this, so excuse me for showing it again, but I'll talk about it in a different way. This is an event space in a 16th century chapel, which at one point looked like this. It was part of a convent. In 1969, the nuns abandoned the convent and the church because it was in complete disrepair. We can get a sort of sense of the disrepair in these images here. This is when we started construction on the site, and a developer had bought this property and the property behind it to do a housing project, and then spun off and sold this to my client. This was the state that it was actually in when we first went to see it. The crane that you see behind the building had actually hit the building. That whole corner had fallen down, so they had repaired it. and it had all sorts of just pathologies and bad details. And part of the dome had caved in, the roof had caved in, this structural dome had caved in as well. It was full of birds and just this abandoned space. But at the same time, a wonderful opportunity. So the client initially wanted to make a restaurant. Also, what's interesting, Monet in a lecture once said the big difference between doing a project in the US and doing a project in Europe is that in the US, they know exactly what they want, how much it'll cost, and all the details. And in Spain, you have clients, both public institutions and private clients who really don't know what they want, and they sort of have an idea, and you help walk them through that process. So it's a much longer process. This project really took like 9 years. The client originally wanted to do a restaurant, which is what the developer had sold him, and then decided that would be just be an event space that could be free for other types of activities as well. So we built a model, which is what you see here, and we developed this idea of creating 3 zones clearly defined in the model. One area, which is the old apse, or where the altar was, would be restored to its sort of original condition, whereas where the dome is. The entrance piece would be a mix between old elements and new elements. And then the third piece is a new metal structure, 3-story building inserted within the fabric of this old structure. Here we can see a section of that. It's actually 4 stories, 4 levels. And then it has this space we call the choir, which is inspired by the nuns' original choir space, overlapping into the space. So here we can get a sense of the kitchen downstairs, bathrooms, and other service spaces on the intermediate level with an elevator for wheelchair accessibility. This upper level, which overlooks on top of this choir piece, and finally an upper level with bathrooms and changing rooms for employees. Once again, a photo of the model, which actually I think really shows the design concepts which are then realized in reality. So this is sort of after, where we've completely repointed all the masonry. But there was one thing that was very interesting. There was no money because it was a private client. So we had to sort of just accept that if a stone was broken, the stone was broken. So in this cornice, for example, there's some pieces of concrete that were set in there in the 70s, and those pieces of concrete are still there. And so it's this sort of mishmash of past interventions that we've respected. And I kind of appreciate that because we didn't have money to do everything, and that allows you focus on the big gestures and the big ideas. Here you can see the entrance. So as I said, there was no way to replace these sort of broken pieces, but I like the fact that the original fabric is still present and still somewhat deteriorated and somewhat showing the history of what it looked like. We did open several new openings in the facade. We had to work with the local Fine Arts Commission. And here in the interior, you get a sense of which is the same sort of view as the model, where you get this sort of big piece articulated within the space. All the materiality is based on this sort of the original material. So pine wood, there's the stone floors on the ground level, which are ours, which is the same sort of stone that is original. Then this area in the middle, which is a mix between the sort of restored area, this sort of mixed area, we left exposed stone. We didn't have money to recreate the original arches in the space, so we did this wooded slatted dome. We designed this light fixture, which was incorporates emergency lighting, fire. So if there's a fire, the lights go on. All of that is incorporated, and it has different settings, so you can illuminate. There's 9 different settings, so you can program it to illuminate the space in a different way. Here you can get a view from below to that restored dome, which we had seen as a decrepit piece. And this idea of this piece coming into the space and being the sort of relationship between the new geometries and the old geometries, the new materials, which look to the old materials, and sort of this an honesty of materials where we have the original structure was either stone, plaster, or wood. And here we have the concrete beam, the wooden cladding, and the new structure. LED lighting had just sort of come into use at that time, and we incorporated it in this wooden structure, in this sort of lattice work around that piece. And you can get a sense of scale. This is the back entrance to comply to wheelchair accessibility. And this is that intermediate space where you can sort of be floating within the space as a sort of almost religious idea. The other thing is we would call the light fixture a halo. So our idea is also that this halo floating in space. One thing that's also interesting in architecture, I find, and I believe probably learned here, is that the idea of creating new visions of old spaces or new ideas about space. So this space, you could never have been in this space, unless you were up on a ladder. And there's this wonderful views from above in the space that were completely impossible in the earlier iteration of the building. This is natural lighting. There's no artificial lighting. South light coming in and hitting us. The building is completely twerked and warped and deformed by time. And here we have a video. Is there no sound? One second. Technical difficulties once again. It's muted. So just move that here. Okay. Technical difficulties once again. There's another video later. Okay. Thank you. So we were fortunate to receive 2 prizes for this project, one from Europa Nostra, as we saw before, and then the other from this American magazine called Faith and Form. And it was actually at the AIA convention in Chicago in 2013. Actually, I'm going really fast, so we can take a little more time on the next project. So the final project I want to talk about as an extra large project. So this is one of the largest projects we've done in the office. It's for what was a old-fashioned suburban bus line between the suburbs of Madrid and the center of the city. And it was bought by a company called Diva, which is a German-based transportation company, and they are the 2nd largest transportation company in the world. They own bus lines all over Europe. And we were hired by the young CEO. We were actually asked to participate in a competition. So I'm showing here the composition, the panels of the competition, and which is kind of ugly, this image. We'll see that it improves. And basically, it was a really complex program because there's an existing building on the site, which we can see here. So there was an existing building. They were able, where you cited the new building was key because they couldn't leave their existing building while they were building the new building. And then there was all these buses, and there was a filling station up here. There's a car wash or bus wash here. There's separation of hydrocarbons, residuals, and all these sort of things need to be taken into account. So this was the presentation that we sent them, which I thought would be kind of cool for us to see because it graphically shows. It's like a thesis project in the sense that it's a really interesting building that combines spaces for garage spaces to repair the buses, and then combines with office spaces above, changing rooms for the drivers and mechanics on the upper level, and then there's rooms for educational purposes, to have classes, and here we can see the different plans. So there's huge amount of infrastructure and technical spaces for this building. And then one of our ideas was that how do you relate the labor of the administrative staff to what's happening downstairs? And so we created this sort of courtyard space around the garage spaces below with certain visuality or views from one space to another. And then on the very top, there's a space for the holding company as well as educational rooms. So one of the cool things was we had to learn a lot about the turning radius of a bus. So all of these drawings are showing, can we really get these buses in and out of the site? And what was really cool is to actually, when we actually laid out the project, the driver would get in the bus and he would literally do what we had drawn, and they would say, oh, this won't work. And we would say, well, yes, it will. And we would have these conversations about, can they turn or not? They do hit the building and they do hit things. And actually, I talked to my office this morning, and the London heads were actually visiting today, and the bus that was delivering them to the site rammed into the gate and destroyed part of the gate and part of the bus. And they were all jittery because of that. So it is an ongoing issue. So basically we won the competition because of this section. And we had this idea, first of all, that the workspaces should be as exciting architecturally as the garage spaces, and that the garage spaces, as we see on the right, should have this, skylighting in a factory tradition. It's in an industrial park, really ugly 1970s industrial park, where you can see that there's great architectural ideas that have just been sort of lost over the years. And so we wanted to sort of recover the idea of this tradition of sort of good building. In this version, there was a bridge connecting the main offices on the left to the central core, which is where the services are. And this is basically, so this is a final version of the project. And this is actually reproduced. And in all of this, at some point, so it's a very young company in a good way. And, one thing that my professors here would say is that behind every good project, there's a good client. And these were really good clients because, first of all, they're European, and they have this sort of this international vision of what a company should be and what a company that's providing transportation in the city should embrace in terms of sustainability. So we introduced to them the idea of making a passive house building, so it complies to Passive House, which is a German institute, which the building is heavily insulated with sort of double doors so that it's airtight, but then there's renovated air that comes in, and we comply to all the passive passive house standards. So there are electrical, they're going to introduce electrical buses that run on electricity. So there are plugs in the yard in the parking for that. There's, we recycle the water from the washing tunnel. There's solar panels on the roof to provide both hot water and energy. The building's completely efficient in terms of its climatization in the administrative part. We have the photovoltaic cells for electricity. So those ones provide electricity, the other ones heat water. We also have the certification of the passive house, and then we have a green roof. And we recycle the water from the toilets as well. So it's the idea of the project was to include as many aspects as possible in terms of current technologies in terms of sustainability. I just did this sort of resume sheet where we could get a sense, because it was the first passive house project we had done, and it's a very large project, and so it has all these finicky details where everything has to be sealed and double sealed. There's tape, which is this middle image here. These black lines there are actually tapes, and all of the joints between this water, it's not water, white, it's airtight sealant, have to be sealed in themselves. And then there's a blower test. So this is what we're seeing here in this image here is the blower test, where you suck out air so that you can see if you're getting air coming in. And if you fail, and we did it at 2 levels at different times, and we complied to both of them. So that was a good thing. Oops. So this is the finished building. What's actually really interesting as well is it uses standard industrial park technology. So it's a metallic structure with cast concrete slab panels. The facade is a really thick aluminum sandwich panel, but it's the thickest one available. And then we have to close it off on the inside with drywall, and then that's all sealed. And so in some ways it's a vulgar building, and we use a sort of normal and off the rack details that were kind of fun to deal with as well. This is the base of the building, which has backlit, LED lit steel, perforated steel or expanded steel. This is the signage on the main facade. And this is a view of the parking garages, and so, or where the buses are repaired. There's actually a parking garage below the building. This is a process photo. And this is what the finished space would look like. So one thing also is that we wanted the mechanics had been working in a building from the 70s that was just grimy and black, and it had skylights, but the skylights hadn't been cleaned in 30 years. So one thing we also spoke to them a lot about was how to make the space that they're working every day, because really the fleet of buses is maintained, by this team of mechanics who are, working really hard, physically hard. What's also interesting is this space above, which is an outlook space for the mechanics as well, for that whole department to sort of be in contact and see what's happening at the same time. So we tried to produce these visual relations. This is the offices above, where we did a lot of furniture made to order. So this is the whole idea of, well, then COVID hit. So we redesigned the offices, and every employee has a locker, so you can arrive and you can have hot desking where you can sit in a different place every day. So you're not required to have your place. You can move around, and there's all different types of spaces to work in for these, which in Spanish they call them the burgers, like a Burger King. So these are the burgers. And I was like, can't we think of a better name than a burger? So we designed these spaces so that if you're, if the person sitting next to you is, talking or coughing and is bothering you, you can get up and go work in one of these other spaces as well. Then we also did an extensive amount of interior design with color coding, where the offices are all the blue spaces and all of the meeting rooms are yellows and greens. And so there's a color coding in the space to help people get around the space. Then we also work together with a graphic designer to do the signage. So each space has its numbers. A lot of interesting details. And what's fun is the building also, everything is exposed because it's an industrial building. So you see all of the conduits, all the plumbing, all of the ventilation systems as well. These are actually 2 focus rooms. So they're very tiny, small conference rooms. So you can have a call with somebody and not be bothered by somebody else. This is another conference room as well. And this is the main conference room for the, uppity, the higher ups when they come in as well. This is the control room. And this is actually very interesting because so this whole building is like a microcosm of how the company works. So you have the mechanics on the ground floor with the buses, and they're physically preparing the buses, and there's the garage, the car wash, and then there's the fuel pumps so you can get gas. And then there's the electrical chargers. So it's like this whole sort of industrial world. And then there's this technical world where these are the guys who are controlling the buses and live within 24 hours a day, because there are nighttime buses as well. And they're controlling where that bus is, if it's had an accident, what the traffic is like. So there's like 24-hour contact. So this is the main control room with this map showing the different routes as well, which we've collaborated with them on the design. This is that courtyard, which we had in the original drawing. So all of the offices are around this courtyard space. So in times of COVID as well, you can go outside, you can have a call outside, there's seating outside, you can smoke a cigarette if you want, you can have a cup of coffee. And then there's also these views from these skylights down into the repair space as well. We proposed to them, and what's been fascinating about this project is they've been very open to any suggestion we've made. So we decided that in this triple height space, which we'll see now, that there should be a mural painted. So this is the sort of windbreak to come into the building. This is a triple height space. We decided, well, there was going to be a museum, which we're currently designing on the third level. And we decided that there should be a big mural here. So we proposed to them to do a competition with all the local design schools. Which is happening even as we speak. I believe today was the date to turn in the proposals by the students for the mural design. And there was a prize as well. So this is actually photos of a group of students visiting the site. And this is actually a student taking a picture of that wall where the mural should be. So what's been really fun is how, as architects, we're orchestrating a collaborative movement with the community and in an inclusive way. And the company is open to that, and it's very satisfying that we can reach that level of detail in the project. And here we have different photos. This is Francisco. He's the CEO of the local company of Arriba, with a group of people showing in the space. And this is also a great view because it explains also this idea of this visualness, of visual connections. And sometimes when I walk through the building, I feel like it's a summary, and I feel like this on a lot of my projects, some which I didn't show today as well, that all the years of education, both in school and after school, then are integrated into your projects as you go on. So there's spaces here that I'm like, oh, that's a little bit of Le Corbusier, or that's a little bit of Lutyens, or that's a little bit of Ralph Bennett, or that's a little bit of Brian Kelly. So I really think you need to keep that in mind as you continue with your education, that it all builds up and you really bring with you all that baggage in a good way. So there's these great visuals. This is that same view from the side and then looking out over that space. And we can also see all the building systems and how they're integrated into the space. And how they lift up and there's been hundreds of anecdotes about this project where technically it's a very, very complicated, where we have an engineer, we have a structural engineer, we have the passive house person, we have the architects, we have the client, we have the IT people. It's been immense because they're online, 24 hours a day with their serving systems. So one of the big problems, they couldn't move because the new server wasn't installed. So the whole move was put off 3 weeks because there was a problem with the server being sent from Germany or wherever it was coming from. And doing pretty good. So here's a view from above of that space, which hopefully next month we can see pictures of how this giant mural, and the idea is also that mural could happen every year, that there could be a competition, it could be a changing element in the space. And this is a promotional video from them, so we can see how they've represented the project. 1 second, do this music. And doing pretty good. So here's a view from above of that space, which hopefully next month we can see pictures of how this giant mural, and the idea is also that mural could happen every year.
El primer paso, el segundo, el cambio empieza cada día. A veces cuesta un poco, es cierto, pero los resultados hacen que valga la pena. En Arriba pensamos igual. Sabemos que ofrecerte el mejor servicio pasa por mejorar cada área. Por eso, como tú, nosotros también cambiamos. Arriba da un importante paso adelante en su apuesta por la innovación y la sostenibilidad. Presentamos nuestra nueva sede en el sur de Madrid, un edificio referente del que sin duda nos sentimos orgullosos. Y que los paneles mejor servicio pasa por mejorar cada área en España. Enseñando nosotros también cambiamos. 8.000 metros cuadrados de instalaciones, construidas según los criterios del Instituto Arriba da un importante paso adelante en su apuesta por la innovación y la sostenibilidad. Seguro, creando las condiciones para favorecer la salud y el bienestar de nuestro gran equipo humano, nuestro mayor activo.
Estamos orgullosos de presentar nuestro nuevo edificio en la Comunidad de Madrid, que va a suponer una referencia en el sector. Arriba es una compañía líder en el transporte de pasajeros en Europa que tiene un fuerte compromiso con la innovación y la sostenibilidad. Aunque todas las acciones en el campo de la sostenibilidad tienen un efecto a largo plazo, nosotros estamos convencidos que el momento de actuar es ahora. Y este edificio, sin lugar a dudas, es una buena muestra de ello. Estamos orgullosos de presentar nuestro nuevo edificio en la Comunidad de Madrid, que va a suponer una referencia de calidad del aire. Arriba es una compañía líder en el transporte de pasajeros.
Las condiciones interiores son próximas a las instalaciones. Por espacio, vale.
Somos más de 1.000 personas trabajando, innovando y en constante formación para desarrollar soluciones de transporte conectadas, seguras, ecológicas, digitales, al servicio de millones de personas los 365 días del año.
Además, las nuevas instalaciones disponen de talleres con la última tecnología y una central de carga para vehículos cero emisiones. La nueva sede de Arriba de Alcorcón es un proyecto integral que ve y representa el principio de la estrategia de descarbonización. Nuestro compromiso en Arriba es con los 40 millones de viajeros a los que atendemos cada año. Por ello seguimos apostando por el cambio, además por la mejora continua para, entre todos, construir una última transportería más sostenible y eficaz para vehículos cero emisiones. El futuro es ahora. La nueva Diva, Cabo de
So unpleasant. I think the matrix is something happening there. There's a black cat, somebody walking away. I've gone much faster than I imagined I would, probably skipped tons of things. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions because one thing that I really, when I thought about this lecture, I really wanted to express the fact that I really feel like everything I bring to the table started here and in the University of Maryland. As a great basis for the education. And I don't think I would be where I am. I certainly wouldn't be where I am without having come through here. And so I would like to invite you all to ask any and all questions that you might have.
My name is Yash. I really on an elaboration to your comment actually about what you learned here. how did you foster like your interest in adaptive reuse of buildings and like what path did it like through the studios here and through your work here? How did you foster like your interest in architecture and what sites you wanted to pursue in the next lane of your education?
I think I had to write an essay to enter here to the School of Architecture. I assume you all did as well. And I wrote about my grandparents' house was a house from the 20s, and I lived in a Levitt house in Bowie, where every fifth house was the same house and had, you know, to me, ugly details. Now I don't think they're so bad, but they're pretty bad. And my grandparents lived in this, you know, neo-Tudor 1920s house that had glass doorknobs and brass doorknobs and stained glass windows. And I wrote about that in my essay. I mean, I can distinctly remember making that connection. So I think I became an architect because I really like buildings and I like things and what happens in buildings. And one thing I would say is that interest has fed my career and fed my interest and fed my unquietness, we'd say inquietudes, my restlessness in terms of design, and be it in Tuscany or in Portugal or in Bucharest or Moscow, that's helped because I'm interested in, you know, what is that and how is that made and where is that from? And, you know, I'm always asking questions. I always, I'm inquisitive, and sometimes I think too much. Sometimes maybe pass the line, but with my clients or with, so for example, when looking at these images, I think of all the people involved in the construction, not just, you know, the client, but, you know, the users and the workmen that made it, or the work people that made it. Even in Moscow, where we were fortunate to have 16 projects, as well as other places. So I'd say there's sort of a basic inquisitiveness that you need to foster in your day-to-day, which you apply to the professional side and the private side of your life as well. I don't think I would be in Spain if I hadn't had that inquisitiveness. Thank you for that question. Good question. Please. I left you guys lots of time.
Thank you for the lecture. My question was, like, when you're approaching an adaptive reuse project, how do you balance changing a building to meet like its current use while preserving like its historic character? How do you manage that? Especially with like historic significant buildings like that.
That's actually a very good question, and I hate that when people say that in lectures, but I believe it is a good question. How do you respect the spirit of a place? How do you respect the spirit of a surroundings, or of the ambiance? And I think key to that is respect, and the respect that you would treat an elderly person, or the respect with which you would treat an elderly building is similar. So I believe it's a question of respect and materiality and how things are made. One thing that Spaniards kept on saying to me was that, well, it's a church. So all my Spanish architect friends were like, it's a church. And I'm like, I'm not Catholic. And yet I've designed a chapel for a Catholic university. And I spoke with I had a builder from Cairo, well, actually from Egypt, who wanted to build, had promised his father he would build a mosque in his hometown. And we had many conversations about that. So the sort of, and I was keen on doing that with him because he was a great guy. And I thought that would be really wonderful with him to make do on this promise he had made his father. So this idea of respect, I believe, is probably, and how do you show respect for a building? You look at how it's made, you look at its materials, you look at its colors, you look at its textures, and you don't turn it into a sort of photoshopped version, you know, like these movie stars who, you know, their teeth are all perfect and then in real life they're not. Or so you need to be careful to not Photoshop a building. There's a building on the corner by my office that's recently been renovated, and it had ashlar original granite blocks as the base of the building, and they clad it with a, a 2 centimeter, a 1.5 inch, brand new granite cladding. And I walked by and I'm like, there's a gorgeous old thing underneath, and there's this new fakey granite, which is still granite, but it's too new. It looks, and so what was this sort of wonderful, full of character old palace is now a brand new palace. So it could be a new building. And I find that extremely disturbing as an architect, because I think there's a lack of respect for the building itself. So I'd say my summary would be respect. Any other questions, maybe? Somebody over here?
Sure, I can just yell. Could you just tell us more about your thesis on houses for the Diva?
Oh, yeah. Hours. That's another PowerPoint I have right here. One of the things that's always interested me, because in my practice, we've walked a fine line, or I think a fine line between how do you have a critical practice? How do you have a practice that's just not about building? And I think you need to maintain an idea of what architecture as a discipline is like. And teaching helps you do that, because teaching reminds you of the good parts of design and not just the day-to-day, fighting with the builder, fighting with the budget, fighting with, the bad details or good details. And so one of the aspects there is the personality of the client. And so when I was doing my PhD coursework, I read a book about divas, and actually it was like a queer studies book and about homosexuality and the diva, and this fascination between gender and persona. And there was one chapter called the Diva at Home. And I thought, well, that's a really good topic. And I did a little article on that was published. And so I really felt like it's a way of so I looked at projects by architects for divas, and I defined a diva or a divo as anybody whose public persona, they never stop being that public persona. So when they're walking down the street, they're still that diva. They're still that person on stage in the public eye, and their homes reflect that. And they don't admit any diminishment of their, aura even at home. And so there's very few examples, because architects and divas tend not to, which also I think was also influenced by the Tom Ford project, because I worked with Alberto Campo Baeza on this project for Tom Ford, and there certainly was some of that going on. And so I decided to explore in my thesis the relationship between what I considered architecture with a capital A and divas. So for example, there was Richard Neutscher designed a house for Joseph von Sternberg, the theater director. Juan O'Gorman designed a house for Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera in Mexico. Philip Johnson designs his house for himself. The architect as diva, as historian, as architect designs his own house, the glass house, as also a commentary on Mises Farnsworth house. Can't remember. Even going back to the history of architecture, Ledoux, Claude Nicolas Ledoux designed a house for the ballet dancer for the Paris ballet named Mademoiselle Guimard, and there's Fragonard portraits of her as this famous dancer. And Josephine Baker, the Adolphe Loos project for Josephine Baker would be, of course, how could we not talk about that? And then I also get in there as well, Charles de Bestige. So Le Corbusier designed a rooftop penthouse for Charles de Bestige, who was a wealthy Mexican Spanish dilettante. So, thank you. Anybody else?
Hi, my name is Kendall. My question is, do you think there's an international movement going on trying to make office spaces more flexible, like you mentioned in your building?
Completely, really good and interesting aspect of the COVID. So unfortunately in my team, we have a woman named Cora who had come from the world of office design, and then COVID hit. And so really completely redesigned the office space. And actually I was going to add it to the competition, sort of what we had proposed as office space and what we ended up doing. So all these other spaces, like the burgers, what they call the burgers, those what do you call them? Booths. Those booths, there's little tiny 1 or 2 person focus rooms, which, and they're all English terms, focus rooms, then there's like medium-sized conference rooms, and there's large conference rooms. So there's all these spaces, and including the exterior space, that are all thought of as spaces where you can work and not be, you know, sitting next to somebody who's breathing on you. And actually the building is, I think, really user-friendly in that way. And the staff, or the, you know, the team of Riva are really thrilled by this building, because they were in this sort of yucky 70s building that had had like 15 renovations over the years, and was just, there was like no windows. I mean, it was really like a sort of oppressive space. And now there's, you know, views out, there's skylights that each one can, you know, you can go off on your own, or you can be with people. And there's tall tables, so you can just have a, you know, meeting standing up. So there's like, I think 5 different types of spaces, as well as a traditional desk. So completely. And that is the whole, we're doing now 3 other office projects, and really have incorporated a lot of what we've learned in this time of COVID and of changing work habits. So I think that's a good question.
So Adam, it's been, it still is a pleasure teaching with you. I don't want this semester to be over, so I'm not going to put it in the past. And a pleasure to see this work. I have a comment and I have a question. So the comment is that I just find it really interesting to see the transport company use architecture as part of its branding, right? Which is not something we're really accustomed to. It's really more from, let's say, the first half of the 20th century, Bauhaus and Diva, where the expression of infrastructure was itself architectural. And I think we're seeing some moves in that direction. But I'm trying to imagine if we would be likely to see an American company, you know, like Greyhound, or even one of the many grungy airports that we used to be in the United States, elevate architecture more, which I think is a little bit more common in Europe, in particular in Spain. So that's one thing I was really excited to see. The question has to do with the chapel and the choir. So I think a lot about choirs, because it's really important in Spanish cathedrals and also monastic churches, which this is. And I'm not sure if the audience knows what the church attached to a convent is, but congregation of the choir is sort of the essence of the order of nuns, right? That's what they do. And so I was wondering, when you said that you designed that freestanding element cantilevered into the space, I don't know if you use the word memory, but sort of in memory of the choir, was there any evidence of what that choir looked like, and how did it actually function, and where did you remove walls to allow access to that choir, that new choir space?
Great question. I actually, it's funny because all week I've been listening to the lectures, and every time everybody said great question, I'm like, is that really a good question? But it is a good question. First, about architecture as branding, I think Apple, you know, I think so many companies are using architecture as branding. They should. I mean, please count on us. And actually, our competition were like 2 engineering firms, and their project was just, you know, unviable aesthetically. I mean, maybe viably in terms of engineering, but first of all, they ignored that there was an existing building on site. It ignored that they couldn't, you know, move something. They were gonna. It was just absolutely inviable. And so one thing that was kind of comforting as an architect was like, okay, we're better equipped to deal with all these complex issues than an engineering firm, because the engineering firm was like, you know, the engineering is what's more important. I think we were able to interlace or interlock or weave together a huge number of factors to create and make, facilitate the construction of the building. And I think that is what an architect needs to do, facilitate. And in some ways, a nightmare, because, you know, they asked for this competition. They had 3 teams, and then they hadn't prepared sufficiently their program. So like the project was, they moved in late because their IT team had never said, oh, you know, they never looked at the plans, and it was like, well, the the server room, looking at it, was half the size of what they needed. And it was like, you've had this project for 2 years. It's been under construction. You could walk across, the plot, the property and look at it. And then, so we had to change, there were change orders and then, hundreds of change orders in terms of things that they could have taken, thought about beforehand. So it was sort of mismanaged in that aspect. But on the other hand, allowed us to solve all those issues at the same time. So I think architects are really important because we're the theater directors or the orchestra directors, and we see the big picture within the history of architecture as well. I mean, we should be able to have a critical cultural point of view, which allows us to both comment on that specific problem, but that problem within the context of 20th century or 21st century architecture. So very much agree with that. In terms of the choir, there isn't a wall behind this. So actually there's a photo which I haven't showed in this. So that wall that you're seeing in the back here, the choir was a big rectangular opening. This was filled. So there was like a mezzanine level, which was the choir. And there was a grill and the nuns. So the choirs are not necessarily, well, there's choirs which are in Spanish cathedrals, which are places where the monks would be singing Gregorian chants or reading or praying. And it was sort of a reserved area in an undemocratic way. And then in these monastic orders, there's a grill, which is a choir, and that's where the nuns are listening to mass because the townspeople would come in the main door. Okay. Sorry about that. The nuns would be up in that choir and listening to mass from above, hidden to view behind a grill, and the public would come in here. So instead of just having it back against the back wall, we've extruded it out of that back wall and turned it into a volume. And what's actually interesting, when they've branded this space, they call that intermittent space the choir, and then the sobre coro, the coro y el sobre coro. So it's like on top of the choir, which is that sort of balcony, which I showed in one of these images. So that would be the choir. This space would be the choir, and this would be the over choir area, which I think is like a rooftop terrace. And the other thing we did is we color coded the floors. So the original floor level is stone, and then all the other floors are black to say, okay, you're not in an original space. And even the stairway, which is an original, is black. So everything that's not original is black. So there's sort of a color coding. So the building can be read. If you want to read, you can read the building.
Adam, that was a very fascinating lecture. I have two comments. One is related to that halo light. And that halo light gives me some insight into the idea that practice here is perfect image for practice in Spain might differ from practice in the United States. You mentioned that halo light also served as a fire enunciator, and how prescriptive these pieces of crap are in the United States, and how we cannot really vary very much from that. And I have some suspicion that this is more thoughtful in Spain, in more enlightened countries than in the United States, where it's just prescribed by a fireman who has no sense of design and also really no sense of safety. So I'm just saying that. The second comment is about Diva and encounter. You might like this added to your collection. So back in 1987, the summer before I met you, I was working for Stephen Peterson and Barbara Littenberg in New York, and I went to Rizzoli bookstore, which was a fantastic place for architects because we had books on books on books about architecture. And I looked over in the corner and there's this little guy piling books up like that. And all of a sudden I realized it was Philip Johnson. And I was thinking to myself, should I? I don't know. Yeah, Kelly, you're going to ask this question. So I walk over and I said, Mr. Johnson, he kind of pivots and smiles. And I said, Mr. Johnson, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but where do you put those? He goes, what do you mean? And I said, well, in that house in New Canaan, you can have one book because it's all about minimalism. And he goes, oh, my dear boy, grabs my arm. He goes, you need to come back with me to New Canaan so I can show you my underground library and gallery that I've recently built for myself. Now, I never went back with him to New Canaan because I had an idea of what might happen, but I do know that others that did it. Some became directors of MoMA architecture and so forth. And so I just think that Diva was the same at home as he was shopping in context. So it was very interesting. Thank you so very much for coming back here with us today. I can't wait to see you again in the group.
Thank you.
The last link is on. Kenny, you're God. You held us together by bubble
That
gum.
weird link, that was freaky. I'm like, there's an echo. And like when the music was going on, I could hear it.
Hi, Professor Bresnick. Thank you for the lecture again.
Thank you.
I was actually really